The Old West we know from the movies? Forget it. Between 1850 and 1900, the country went through a brutal transformation that shaped everything we are today. It was a time of opportunity and violence, when a guy could become a hero or an outlaw, depending on who told the story. In this video, 50 archival records will show what really happened in those decisive decades. Number 1. In 1881, the outlaw George Parrott, known as Big Nose for obvious reasons, was lynched by an angry mob in Wyoming. What happened next is where things get really strange. The body ended up in the hands of Dr. John Osborne, a local doctor with political ambitions. And here's the detail nobody could make up. Osborne had the guy's skin tanned and turned into a pair of shoes. Years later, when he was sworn in as the state's governor, he was wearing those exact shoes. The outlaw's skull met another bizarre fate. It was cut in half and used as a desk organizer for decades. The story of Big Nose George shows how different the mindset on the American frontier was, where the line between justice, science, and plain morbid curiosity practically didn't exist. Number 2. Alan Pinkerton was just a barrel maker when by chance he stumbled onto a counterfeit money operation. That discovery changed everything. In 1850, he founded the first detective agency in the United States. The guy was obsessed with paperwork. He kept photos of criminals on file, put together detailed records, and tested fingerprints decades before any official police force did. His system worked so well that the FBI ended up copying a lot of it years later. Jesse James and the James Younger gang learned to fear the Pinkerton name. But here's where the story gets weird. Lincoln hired Pinkerton as his personal bodyguard. The detective stopped an assassination attempt in Baltimore. But on the day Lincoln was killed at Ford's Theater, Pinkerton wasn't there. Coincidence? Or something more? Historians still debate it. Number 3. John Wesley Hardin claimed he killed 41 men, and many historians believe the real number wasn't far off. But out of all those cases, one stands out for how downright bizarre it was. In 1871 in Abilene, Hardin was staying at a hotel when the snoring in the next room kept him from sleeping. His solution: he pulled his revolver and fired through the wall, killing Charles Cougar while he slept. Hardin climbed out the window and kept up his violent career for years. Eventually, the law caught up with him, and he spent 2 decades in prison. When he got out, he tried to become a lawyer in Texas. It didn't last long. In 1895, in an El Paso saloon, John Selman shot him in the back of the head while he was shooting dice. The man who killed dozens died without a chance to fight back. Number 4. 2 regular guys, Philip Arnold and John Slack, showed up in San Francisco in 1872 carrying a beat-up leather bag. Inside, it were diamonds and rubies they swore they'd found in a secret field in Colorado. The news spread fast and drew in big shots, including a railroad baron and a senator. They put together an expedition to see the spot with their own eyes. And guess what? The stones were practically popping out of the ground when they dug. Investors poured millions into the deal without blinking. But there was one problem nobody noticed. Arnold and Slack had traveled to Europe months earlier and came back with rough diamonds bought in London. They buried the stones themselves on the land, placing them right where they knew the first shovelfuls would hit. The whole scam only fell apart when a government geologist examined the samples and noticed something weird. Diamonds and rubies never show up together in nature. Number 5. Fort Griffin became known as the Babylon of the Brazos, and it had plenty of reasons for that. The place brought together a mix you wouldn't see in any town. Wanted gunmen, buffalo hunters who'd gone months without a bath, pro gamblers, and women who ran saloons. Doc Holliday lived there before Tombstone, and they say it was in Griffin that he met Big Nose Kate. John Wesley Hardin, the man who supposedly killed more than 40 people, walked the streets like any ordinary citizen. The funny thing is, all that chaos worked. The law barely existed, but the buffalo hide trade was moving fortunes. It was thousands of hides a week. The money drew in all kinds of people, and nobody asked questions about anyone's past. When the buffalo were gone, the town simply died. Number 6. Bass Reeves was born enslaved, but the Civil War changed everything. He escaped and hid out for years in Indian Territory, living among native tribes. There he learned 5 different languages and memorized every trail across that wild land. When the war ended, something surprising happened. The federal government needed someone who knew that dangerous territory, and Reeves was the perfect man. He became the first black deputy marshal west of the Mississippi. The bizarre detail? Reeves couldn't read or write, but he memorized every arrest warrant he was given. In 32 years of service, he captured more than 3,000 criminals. Legend says he was never shot, even though he was in constant gunfights. Many historians believe his story inspired the Lone Ranger character. Number 7. Charles Bowles came over from England to the United States when he was still young and tried his luck in the gold rush. He didn't strike it rich in the mines, but he found another way. Between 1875 and 1883, he robbed 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California. The strange part, he never fired a single shot. He used an unloaded shotgun. After each robbery, he left poems signed as Black Bart inside the empty strong boxes. It took the police 8 years to catch him, and when they finally arrested him, it was a big surprise. Bowles wasn't your typical outlaw. He was a respectable gentleman in San Francisco, well-dressed, who ran with high society. He served 4 years in prison and then simply disappeared. No one knows for sure where or when he died. Some say Wells Fargo ended up paying him to keep quiet. Number 8. Calamity. Jane became a legend while she was still alive, but a lot of what she said about herself didn't line up with the records. She claimed she'd been an Army scout, fought Indians, and even worked as a nurse during epidemics. The military never confirmed any of it. What's actually known is that she grew up orphaned, took care of her younger siblings, and worked jobs women simply didn't do back then. She wore men's clothes, drank in saloons, and carried guns. Some historians think she made up stories to sell herself in Wild West shows. Others say the frontier was so chaotic that records got lost. The fact is, she died poor and asked to be buried next to Wild Bill Hickok, a man who may not even have been her lover. Truth or showmanship? Number 9. You've probably heard about Old West whiskey, but I bet you don't know this part of the story. Traveling peddlers had a trick to convince Indians to buy it. They'd splash a little of the drink into the fire. If the flame turned blue, it passed. That's why they called it Firewater. But here's the crazy part. It was barely real whiskey. The recipe included pure alcohol, burnt sugar for color, and believe it or not, chewing tobacco to give it that strong taste. Some even threw pepper and even gunpowder into the mix. It was so harsh that one sip could drop any cowboy to his knees. And even so, this makeshift drink kept saloons running, closed cattle deals, and sealed land agreements all across the territory. The truth is, the West wasn't won with revolvers alone. Number 10. In 1874, 6 men headed into the Rocky Mountains of Colorado in the dead of winter, looking for gold. Only one walked out, Alferd Packer. When he showed up months later, he was way too well fed for someone who claimed he'd been starving. Investigators thought that was strange, and it got worse. They found the 5 bodies, all with axe wounds to the skull and chunks of flesh missing. Packer changed his story several times. First, he said he found the others dead. Then he admitted he ate their flesh to survive. Finally, he claimed self-defense against one of them who had supposedly gone crazy. The jury didn't buy it and convicted him. The case became a legend in Colorado, inspiring books, movies, and even a university cafeteria named after him. The question nobody could answer for sure: did he kill to eat, or eat because he killed? Number 11. In 1911, this guy tried to rob a train in Oklahoma, but everything went wrong. Elmer McCurdy died in the shootout, and nobody came to claim the body. The funeral home owner had an idea that sounds insane today. He embalmed the guy so well that he started charging a penny for people to see the corpse. It caught on. A few years later, 2 men showed up saying they were his brothers. Lie. They were owners of a traveling show. From there, McCurdy's body became a circus attraction, went through carnivals and haunted houses. Decades went by. In 1976, a TV crew was filming at an amusement park in California. When they moved what they thought was a mannequin, an arm came off. It was McCurdy. It took 66 years for him to finally be properly buried. Number 12. In 1866, the Reno brothers came up with a crime nobody had tried before: robbing a moving train. John and Simeon waited until it was pitch dark and boarded the Ohio and Mississippi Railway Express as regular passengers. At the right moment, they took over the car and shoved the safe out the door while the train was still moving. They got away with $13,000, enough money to buy a big farm back then. The strangest part is that the gang operated in a small town in Indiana where pretty much everyone knew who they were, but nobody dared to report them. They controlled the whole county through fear. Jesse James only started robbing trains 3 years later, copying the Reno method. The gang created the blueprint Hollywood turned into a legend, but their ending was brutal. A mob stormed the jail and lynched 3 of the brothers. Number 13. Frank James was seen as even colder than Jesse himself. While his brother became a legend, Frank was the one who kept the gang in line. After years of robbing banks and trains, Jesse was shot in the back by a member of his own gang in 1882. What did Frank do next? He walked into the Missouri governor's office and personally turned in his guns. He said he was tired of running. The strangest part, he was tried twice for murder and robbery, and the jury acquitted him both times. People still saw the James brothers as heroes standing up to the rich folks from the North. Frank lived another 33 years in peace, worked at fairs, gave talks about his crimes, and charged admission for tourists to visit the farm where Jesse died. He died in 1915 at 72, in the same house where he was born. Number 14. In 1892, the cattle barons in Wyoming hired 50 gunmen from Texas to wipe out small ranchers they considered thieves. The group set out on a private train carrying horses, guns, and a blacklist with 70 names marked to die. They started by killing 2 men in an isolated cabin, but the locals organized fast, surrounded the invaders at a ranch, and came close to lynching them. The federal army had to step in to save the hired killers. And here's the part nobody believes. None of the gunmen or wealthy ranchers were convicted. Witnesses vanished, records disappeared, and the case died in the courts. money bought silence and freedom, while the little guys lost everything. Number 15. James Miller killed at least 14 men. But every Sunday he put on his best suit and went to the Methodist church. Folks in town called him Deacon Jim because he helped with services and never touched booze or cigarettes in his life. But he had another nickname too, Killer Miller. He wore a metal plate hidden under his clothes and survived 4 shots to the chest that would have dropped anyone else. Some historians believe he was the one who killed Pat Garrett, the man who took down Billy the Kid. For decades, Miller roamed the Old West charging for his services, and nobody could stop him. He seemed unstoppable, until in 1909, an angry mob decided street justice was faster than the courts. The man who prayed on Sundays ended up hanging from a rope. Number 16. Here's something that'll surprise you. Before 1870, the American West didn't have fences. Cattle roamed wherever they wanted, and nobody could really control what was theirs. Big ranchers would basically absorb the small guys' cattle because there was no physical barrier. In 1873, a farmer from Illinois named Joseph Glidden solved that problem in a way that changed everything. He took 2 steel wires, twisted them together, and stuck metal barbs between them. Sounds simple, but that invention destroyed an entire culture. Cowboys driving herds from Texas up north suddenly lost their jobs because cattle couldn't cross other people's land anymore. The famous trails got cut off. The free-roaming cowboy became a legend, and the land became the property of whoever could buy wire first. Number 17. Look, this one will have you thinking for days. In 1870, in New Mexico, there was a guy named Charles Kennedy who opened an inn in the middle of nowhere, between Elizabethtown and Taos. It seemed like an honest business, but the guy had a twisted scheme. Travelers would show up tired, pay for a room, and then just vanish. Kennedy killed every one of them, took their stuff, and got rid of the bodies. The most disturbing part? His own young son once warned a guest about the danger. The kid whispered that his father planned to kill the man that night. Kennedy found out about the boy's betrayal and without hesitation killed his own son to keep him quiet. His wife, a woman from the Ute tribe, eventually ran off and told the authorities everything. When they investigated the property, they found human bones scattered across the land. Number 18. Belle Starr wasn't just another outlaw. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley, she grew up around famous criminals, including the James brothers. She married Sam Starr, a Cherokee man, and together they ran a horse-stealing operation in Indian Territory. The weird part? Belle kept up an elegant image while running criminals. She was armed, but dressed like a society lady. Newspapers didn't know whether to treat her as a villain or a celebrity, and her ending is even stranger. In 1889, someone ambushed her from behind, 2 days before her birthday. The killer was never found. The suspects, her own son and her lover. To this day, nobody knows who pulled the trigger. Number 19. In 1873 in Kansas, the Bender family ran a roadside inn. Travelers would stop to eat, sleep, and then simply vanish. The trick was simple. They'd seat the guest with their back to a canvas curtain, and while the person ate, someone behind it would smash their head with a hammer. Then they'd drop the body through a trapdoor in the floor. When neighbors finally investigated the abandoned property, they found 11 bodies buried in the orchard, some with their throats cut. The whole family had fled. What happened after that, nobody knows for sure. Some say they were lynched by a group of vigilantes. Others swear they got away and lived under fake names. Kate Bender, the daughter, supposedly offered seance sessions, which only fueled rumors of witchcraft. The case was never officially closed. Number 20. Mary Fields was almost 60 when she became the second person to deliver mail in Montana in 1895. The first black woman in the Postal Service. She was 5 feet 11 inches, smoked thick cigars, drank whiskey in saloons, and went around armed with a rifle and a revolver. Wolves attacked. Bandits tried to rob her. The cold hit 40 below. Nothing stopped her. One time when the horses went down on the ice, she spent the whole night guarding the load from wolves until dawn. She never missed a single delivery. The most surprising part, in a time when women weren't allowed in bars, the mayor of Cascade signed a special permit just so she could drink wherever she wanted. Mary worked until she was 70. When she died, the whole town shut down to attend her funeral. Number 21. Wild Bill. Hickok had a rule he never broke. Sit with his back to the wall, keeping an eye on the door. It worked for years, but in August 1876, at the Nuttall and Mann Saloon in Deadwood, the only chair available left his back exposed. He asked to switch seats. The guy refused. Bill sat down anyway. Jack McCall, a guy Bill had humiliated the day before at a poker table, came in through the back. Nobody saw him. One shot to the back of the head, and it was over. The cards Bill was holding when he died, 2 black aces and 2 black eights, became known as the dead man's hand. To this day, poker players avoid that combo. The strangest detail, McCall was acquitted in the first trial. He claimed Bill had killed his brother. It was a lie. He didn't even have a brother. Number 22. Bodie was born in California during the gold rush in the 1870s. At its peak, it had 65 saloons, and 1 death a day was considered normal. The town got a reputation for being so violent that, according to legend, a little girl wrote in her diary before moving there, "Goodbye, God, I'm going to Bodie." After the gold ran out, fires destroyed a big part of the place, and the residents just left. The weird part is that everything stayed exactly as it was. Plates on the tables, medicines on the shelves, playing cards left out. Today it's a state park, and the rangers keep a curious file. It's letters from visitors returning items they secretly took, apologizing for the bad luck that came after. Number 23, Big Nose. Kate had a big nose, but even bigger guts. She was born in Hungary, was orphaned in the United States, and ended up in a Texas brothel. That's where she met Doc Holliday, the tubercular dentist who turned into a gunman. The two of them got together, fought, split up, and got back together dozens of times. But the craziest episode happened in Fort Griffin. Doc killed a man in a card fight and got arrested. Kate didn't wait for a trial. She set a shed behind the hotel on fire. While the whole town ran to put out the flames, she walked into the jail with 2 pistols, held the guard at gunpoint, and got Doc out. The two of them rode off into the night. She was in her early 20s. She lived into her 90s, buried Doc and several other men, and never apologized for anything. Number 24. In 1881, Tombstone was a ticking time bomb. The Earp brothers wanted order. The cowboys wanted business as usual, with cattle stolen from Mexico and protection from Sheriff Bayan himself. The shootout at the OK Corral? It lasted 30 seconds and killed 3. But the strange part came afterward. Morgan Earp was shot in the back while playing pool. Wyatt then walked away from the law and put together a revenge squad. He hunted suspects down one by one, executing them without a trial. The Arizona government issued a warrant for his arrest, but Wyatt simply crossed the border into Colorado, where local authorities refused to extradite him. He lived another 50 years, died in Los Angeles at 80, and never paid for any of it. The question that stuck: was he a frontier hero or a killer who knew how to pick his enemies. Number 25. Here's something that'll surprise you about the Old West. That bandana cowboys wore around their neck wasn't fashion or some silly thing. It was pure survival. During the long cattle drives, the dust got so thick a man could choke without protection. But it was useful for a lot more than that. The same piece of cloth could be used to grab a hot pot off the fire, cover your ears against the biting cold at night, and strain dirty water before drinking it. And here's the interesting part. With a quick knot, it became the perfect mask for bank robbers and train thieves. That's why the law had a hard time identifying criminals. It was such a common item that nobody questioned who was carrying one. Brilliant and sinister at the same time. Number 26. Billy the Kid died in 1881 at just 21 years old. But what happened after that is what really makes your jaw drop. His grave turned into a total mess. His headstone was stolen not once, but twice over the years. They got so fed up that they ended up chaining the stone to the ground so nobody could take it again. And the wild thing is, people travel hundreds of miles just to visit the spot in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. But here's the part that really makes you scratch your head. To this day, there are people who swear Pat Garrett shot the wrong guy that night and Billy got away alive. Some old-timers in Texas and Arizona spent decades claiming they were the real Billy. So here's the question. Did the most famous outlaw of the Old West really die there? Or was the whole story just a well-told lie? Number 27. Alice Ivers came over from England in 1865 and ended up becoming one of the most feared poker players in the Old West. The funny detail is where she learned to play. In Bob Ford's bar, the guy who shot Jesse James in the back. She became known as Poker Alice, and it was no joke. In a single night, she walked away with $6,000, an insane fortune for the time. She smoked cigars, carried a revolver, and didn't back down to any man at the table. But her story took a dark turn in 1910. A soldier showed up causing trouble at the saloon she ran. Alice didn't think twice and fired. The man died, and she ended up behind bars. The woman who ruled the tables for decades saw her reign end with a single shot. Number 28. The Superstition Mountains in Arizona hold a mystery that's been going on for more than 100 years. Jacob Waltz, a German man everyone called the Dutchman, swore he'd found an unbelievable gold mine out there. The problem is, he died in 1891 without telling anyone where it was. Since then, more than 300 people have vanished or died looking for that treasure. Even experienced hunters disappear without a trace. Bodies turn up decapitated in circumstances that were never explained. Locals talk about an Apache curse, supposedly placed to protect the sacred place. Others report strange lights at night and voices coming out of nowhere. Waltz himself supposedly murdered his partners to keep the secret. Maps that are supposedly legit show up from time to time, but they all lead to dead ends. Even so, to this day, people cross that desert chasing the lost gold. Number 29. Pearl Hart lived an ordinary life in Canada until she watched a Buffalo Bills show. That performance got into her head in a way nobody expected. At just 17, she left everything behind and ended up in Arizona, where she married a guy named Frank Hart and started getting into trouble. In 1899, she and a partner pulled off a stagecoach robbery. The plan even worked, but when it came time to escape, they got lost in the desert and ended up in the hands of the law. The case made national headlines because Pearl was only the second woman in American history to rob a stagecoach, and the only one who survived to tell the story. She was convicted, but here's the wildest part. She served only 18 months because the prison simply didn't have a women's cell to keep her. She was pardoned and vanished from public view. Number 30, Canada. Bill Jones pulled off something few con men ever manage. He died broke. The guy was so addicted to gambling that he'd lose to other hustlers even when he knew the table was rigged. When people asked why he kept betting in a game that was obviously crooked, he said something that became legendary. "It's the only game in town." He ran the 3-card Monte scam on trains and steamboats, making fortunes off farmers and merchants, but he couldn't stop. He used to say money handed to a cheat belongs to whoever knows how to win it back. In the end, Bill didn't even have enough for his own funeral. His gambler friends passed the hat, and one of them joked they should put a deck of cards in the coffin in case he found some sucker in the afterlife. Number 31. In 1860, a group of businessmen had an idea that sounded insane. Create a mail line using teenage riders, crossing Apache territory, deserts, and freezing mountains. The Pony Express hired boys from 14 to 18 exactly because they weighed less and the horses could go longer. Those kids signed contracts swearing they wouldn't drink, fight, or curse. Every 15 kilometers, they'd switch horses at isolated stations, many of them attacked by bandits. The service worked perfectly, but here's the part nobody expected. It lasted only 18 months. The telegraph arrived and wiped it out. The company shut down, owing the equivalent of millions of dollars today, and most of those brave boys simply disappeared from history without getting their last paycheck. Number 32. In the Old West, when a train line changed routes or a mine dried up, whole towns could turn into ghost towns overnight. And that's when the con men showed up. They'd roll in with fake maps, gold nuggets bought in some other town, and a rehearsed pitch about a new gold vein that had just been discovered. They'd claim some famous geologist was backing the deal and push hard. It's now or never, tomorrow it's too late. The fear of missing out made people open their wallets. They'd pay the deposit and the guys would just vanish. No law, no sheriff to complain to, nothing. And the craziest part? Weeks later, other con men would show up in the same town with the same story, just with different maps. People fell for it again. Number 33. In 1856, the U.S. Army decided camels would be the solution for crossing the deserts of Texas and Arizona. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, the same guy who would later lead the Confederacy, convinced Congress to fund the idea. They brought in 66 camels from Egypt and Turkey, along with Arab handlers, to teach American soldiers how to deal with them. The problem was, nobody told the horses. Every time a camel showed up, the horses panicked and bolted. The soldiers couldn't handle the strong smell or the constant spitting either. When the Civil War broke out, the project was abandoned. Some camels were sold to circuses, and others were simply turned loose in the desert. For decades, Arizona ranchers swore they'd seen wild camels wandering the mountains. Number 34. Cherokee Bill was one of the most feared outlaws in Indian Territory in the 1890s. But the detail most people don't know is what happened in jail before his execution. While he was waiting for the gallows, Bill got his hands on a smuggled gun and tried to escape. In the chaos, he killed a guard. The plan failed, and he was put back in his cell. On the day of the hanging, in 1896, the sheriff asked if he had any last words. His answer went down in history. "I came here to die, not to make a speech." He was only 20 years old. In less than 4 years of crime, he racked up at least 7 confirmed deaths. Some historians say it may have been more. What turned a young black Cherokee mixed-race guy into one of the most wanted names in the Old West? The answer isn't simple. Number 35. The practice of scalping didn't start with the Apaches, like a lot of people think. In fact, Plains tribes were already doing it as a war trophy long before that. What few people know is that white settlers adopted the custom too, and some governments even paid bounties for native scalps. During the Civil War, a guy named William Anderson took it to the extreme. He got so notorious for his brutality that he earned the nickname Bloody Bill. In 1864, he and his men attacked a train in Centralia, Missouri, killed more than 20 unarmed Union soldiers, and scalped several of them. Anderson carried the scalps hanging from his horse's saddle like they were medals. He was only 24 when he was killed, but he left a trail of terror that still gives people chills today. Number 36. Tombstone, Arizona, 1890. 2 hunters came into town carrying something nobody could explain. According to the local paper, the Epitaph, they'd shot down a creature with huge wings, something that didn't match any known animal. The body was supposedly stretched out on the wall of a barn for everyone to see. The article described details, mentioned a photo taken on the spot, and then silence. The image vanished. Decades later, people in Tombstone still swore they'd seen that photo as kids, hanging in shops, passed around from hand to hand. Some said it was a pterodactyl. Others said it was a giant bird, the locals called a thunderbird. The strangest part? The more people looked for that photo, the more it seemed to slip away. Archives, private collections, nothing. The question that won't go away: how does a photo seen by so many just disappear? Number 37. For centuries, sailors swore they saw bluish flames dancing on ship masts during storms. They called it St. Elmo's fire and believed it was divine protection. But things get weird when you find out the same phenomenon showed up in the Old West. Cowboys reported seeing that ghostly glow jumping between cattle horns on stormy nights. Picture it. You're driving a herd at night, the sky closes in, and suddenly hundreds of cattle heads start glowing with an unnatural blue light. Horses were affected too, with their ears giving off that same strange glow. Science explains it as an electrical discharge in ionized air. But for those men out on the plains, with no idea what was happening, it felt like nature itself was sending a message that out there, nobody was really in charge. Number 38. In 1879, when they were preparing Charlie Parkhurst's body for burial, the neighbors got the shock of their lives. That rough guy who'd been driving stagecoaches for decades in the American West was, in fact, a woman. Charlotte had run away from an orphanage at 15 and simply decided to live as a man. She lost an eye to a horse kick and picked up the nickname One-Eyed Charlie. She faced armed bandits, blizzards, and roads that were basically cliffs. Records show she voted in 1868, 6 decades before women won that right in the United States. The craziest part is that nobody suspected a thing all those years. Charlotte died alone in a cabin, keeping a secret she carried her whole life. The question is simple: how many other stories like this were never discovered? Number 39. Hollywood sold a lie for decades. In Western movies, the Old West looks like an all-white club. But historical records tell a different story. About 1 in every 4 cowboys was black. These men drove herds for hundreds of miles, broke wild horses, branded cattle with red-hot irons, and competed in brutal rodeos. During the Civil War, When ranchers went off to fight, enslaved people were the ones who kept the ranches running. After emancipation, many freedmen stayed in the work because they knew how to do it better than anyone. They built families and earned respect on the prairies. Movies simply erased these people from the story. The photo shows exactly what the studios didn't want you to see. Number 40. The winter of 1886 to 87 hit the Great Plains like a nightmare nobody saw coming. Temperatures dropped to 40 below. Snow covered everything so fast that cattle couldn't find grass. The animals wandered blind through the blizzard until they dropped dead. When spring came, ranchers found scenes that stuck with them forever. Piles of carcasses stacked against fences, animals frozen standing up, whole ravines filled with bodies. Some ranchers lost 90% of their herds in weeks. The event became known as the Great Die-Up. Estimates say between 300,000 and 1 million head died. Theodore Roosevelt, who had investments in the region, lost almost everything. This disaster forced a revolution in American ranching. Never again rely only on open range. Number 41. Bounty hunters in the Old West had a serious logistical problem. To get paid, they had to prove the guy was dead. For decades, that meant dragging bodies for days under blazing sun until they reached the nearest town. Imagine the condition they showed up in. When photography came along, it became a practical and bizarre solution. The hunter would take the body to the local studio, prop the dead man against the wall, and snap a photo of his face. Some photographers even came up with tricks to make the corpse look more presentable. The image worked as official proof. The hunter could then head off to the next job without hauling dead weight for hundreds of miles. These portraits were filed alongside wanted posters as legal documentation of the capture. Number 42. Imagine spending almost a century trying to explain lights that appear out of nowhere in the middle of the desert. That's what's been happening in Marfa, Texas, since 1883. The first cowboys who saw them thought they were Apache campfires. They went to check. There was nothing there. Scientists at the University of Texas spent years studying the phenomenon. They tested every theory: headlights reflecting off the highway, gases from the ground, heat mirages. None of the explanations fully added up. The lights show up whenever they want, change color, split into several, then come back together. Sometimes they vanish for weeks, then return like nothing happened. Today, there's even an official viewing area where people go to wait for the show. The government hasn't been able to explain it in 140 years, but the lights keep showing up. Number 43. Did you know Old West saloons worked like makeshift banks? Cowboys would leave gold and cash with the bartender because there weren't any safes nearby. The problem was those places drew all kinds of people: pro gamblers, wanted gunmen, and desperate men. A poker game could end with someone dead on the wooden floor. The Long Branch in Dodge City became famous for a curious reason. It had rules. Guns stayed at the door, and fights went outside. Even so, Sheriff Wyatt Earp had to show up almost every night. The original saloon burned down in 1895 and was rebuilt. Today it works as a museum, but the bullet marks on the walls are original. Those holes tell stories no Hollywood movie ever managed to show right.